I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street. Welcome back, folks. This is part 2 of my interview with Mike Cameron, founder of Devils River Bourbon. In this episode, we pick up where we left off with Mike getting involved in the distilled spirits business, what that took, and where it has taken him. Plus, we get into the 3 expressions of the Devils River brand. And finally, he tells us about the upcoming tasting room and the Devils River experience in downtown San Antonio. This episode was recorded in the building that will become the Devils River experience, so there might be some background construction noise, but I tried to get most of that out, and I think I did pretty good at it. So enjoy, guys. This is part 2 of my interview with Mike Cameron, founder of Devils River Bourbon.
Yeah, talk to me, yeah.
And you look at whiskey, you couldn't give bourbon away in the early 1980s. But now it's the hottest thing going. Bourbon is up as a category 63% in the last 5 years. Rye whiskeys are on fire, 785%. That's why we just introduced a brand new rye expression.
I'm sorry, 785%.
In 5 years, yeah. And barrel strengths are very popular. That's the way bourbon whiskey was originally meant to be drank, was right out of the barrel.
So barrel strength means they don't add water, they don't lower the proof, it just comes straight out of the barrel. And those proofs vary because of the evaporation process. And,
that's correct.
Okay, cool.
That's correct.
I just want everybody out there, because everybody out there who's listening is not a bourbon aficionado like yourself or a alcoholic like myself.
Well, if you look at the Old West, and they didn't have transportation; they had horse and buggies, and so the saloon owner would occasionally get a delivery of whiskey barrels brought to his facility, and it was kind of a neat thing to have that whiskey delivery because that's your money maker. So he would put those beautiful barrels up on his behind his back bar. And the brand name of the barrel would be on the outside of the barrel. That's where the term brand name came from, was whiskey barrels. And so they didn't have a glass really back then in terms of bottles, but a local merchant or a local saloon had his collection of empty bottles that he bought from a local producer, and then he would fill those bottles and bottle it right there at the saloon and sell it to the public. And this is all over the United States, this was going on. So that's the way whiskey was originally meant to be drank. But because it was sometimes in short supply, these saloon owners said, wait a minute, we can make this go further. Let's add water to it and make it go further. So that's where water came along. I like barrel strength whiskey. It's my favorite.
Just so y'all know, if you think adding water to a barrel of whiskey is fucked up, research Prohibition, because they were adding fucking iodine and all kinds of crazy shit to that then.
That's true.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's very true. So the original intent of whiskey was to be consumed right out of the barrel, and I think it's the best way to drink whiskey. Neat, right out of the barrel strength, because it's got so much flavor and so much character, and barrel strength whiskeys are becoming really popular for that reason. Rye whiskeys prior to Prohibition were absolutely the preferred whiskey in the United States, especially in the Northeast. They were made with, Manhattan, mixed with Manhattans and Old Fashions, those kind of drinks. But that's why they're making a huge comeback. Mixologists love rye whiskeys right now, and that's why they're doing so well. So we're trying to tap into the trends, which is bourbon, rye whiskey, and barrel strength. And those are our 3 expressions that we now have with our new company.
I'm sorry, one more time. The 3 expressions that you have with this Devils River company are?
Oh, we have a small batch Texas bourbon. And a lot of people say, what is a small batch? What constitutes a small batch? That's 125 barrels or less.
Or less. And that is stipulated by law, by United States law?
I've never seen that in writing, but that's kind of the gentleman's acceptance of what it is in the industry. I see some variants of that. Sometimes people say it's 100, some people say 150, but most people agree that 125 or less is an agreeable amount for a small batch. Because you look at the big distilleries in Kentucky, they've got thousands and thousands of barrels in their rick houses. 125 barrels is nothing in that scheme of things. So they're hand-selected barrels out of their thousands of barrels that they choose to bottle. So this is a small batch Texas bourbon whiskey.
He's pointing at Devils River Bourbon Whiskey, small batch Texas bourbon whiskey. You'll see the picture on the website.
And then the rye whiskey we just released literally last week.
I've never seen it last week, so that explains why.
Yeah.
So now you guys have a rye whiskey.
We do.
So just like the United States law governs everything, There is an actual definition, and that is the difference between bourbon and whiskey. A lot of people think that bourbon has to be made in the bourbon region of Kentucky, much like the Champagne region of France. But as far as bourbon and whiskey, that is a misnomer. The rules for bourbon are...
It's got to be distilled at no more than 160 proof. It's got to be put in a barrel at no more than 125 proof. It's got to be made with at least 51% corn. It's got to be put into a brand new American charred white oak barrel, and it's got to be aged in the borders of the United States. When it's emptied out of the barrel, it has to be bottled at no less than 80 proof or 40% alcohol. Those are all specific definitions established May of 1964. That is law. This is our Appalachian spirit. We own bourbon in this country. And just like Mexico owns tequila, or as you mentioned, champagne and even cognac in France, that's their appellation. You can't make those. You can make those things somewhere else. You just can't call them those things. Like, sparkling wine in California is champagne, but you can't call it champagne. There's some people in Texas making making tequila, and it's fantastic, but they can't call it tequila. They call it like an agave elixir or something.
It's a spirit.
Yeah. It's tequila, but they can't call it that because of protection. It's smart for countries to protect things like this.
Absolutely. It's Scotch.
That's right.
I mean, that is 100% Scottish.
Right. And there's other things that aren't protected. You can make gin anywhere in the world. You can make vodka anywhere in the world. You can make rum anywhere in the world. And you can make a sotol, which is an unusual kind of further expression from tequila and mezcal, but they didn't bother protecting it. So as a result, we've got a sotol distillery outside of Austin, Texas, doing sotol, which is cool that we've got the ability to do that.
There's a cactus moonshine distillery in Comfort, Texas.
There is.
And
good people.
Oh my gosh, they're the greatest. They are 15 minutes from my door to their door. Mm-hmm. I go there all the time. I love them so much.
Yeah. John and Casey.
John and Casey. And it's basically, it's tequila. It's made out of cactus. It's delicious, but it's made in Comfort, Texas, so it's not tequila.
Well, there's a misnomer about tequila. A lot of people think that the agave plant is cactus, and it's actually not. It's actually from the lily family, and it has to be 7 years old. And it's interesting how the agave plant is pollinated.
Hold on. Yeah. So the plant or the product has to be 7 years old?
The plant.
Okay.
Before you can harvest the plant. The way it is pollinated is fascinating. It's by a Mexican fruit bat. Is how they're pollinated. So without bats, you don't have tequila. So don't ever get mad at bats.
Now everybody who's freaked out about bats and us talking about bats are a massive part of Austin culture, massive part of Fredericksburg culture,
mosquito control
culture. I feel like half the total population of bats is in South Texas.
That's right.
We have a lot of bats here.
There's even fertilizer.
There's even a shitload of bats like in between San Antonio and Bernie.
And Brecken, yeah.
There's a couple of bridges that if you're driving down I-10 at the right time, it's just a sea of bats and you don't know what the fuck is going on. So we're talking about the definition of bourbon versus whiskey. Mm-hmm. So I have often said, and since you have had all the education and you make your living this way, tell me if I'm wrong. The difference between bourbon and whiskey, let's take Jack Daniels, the most famous example. Jack Daniels is not a bourbon. It's not a bourbon not because it's made in Tennessee, but because it goes through a charcoal filter after it comes out of the still.
Is that correct? It's a sour mash, and it's also called the Nelson County process. And what that is they take basically sugar maple trees, they burn them and create charcoal, and then they drip the finished distillate down through this large, container of burnt charcoal, sugar maple trees. And it filters out some of the harsh methyl alcohols. It works. They have a product called Gentleman Jack, which is even smoother than Jack Daniels. And it's gone through that process twice, and it's the same whiskey. It's just been filtered twice through that charcoal. So that is not bourbon. That's not the definition of bourbon. That's the definition of Tennessee whiskey.
And the reason it's not bourbon is because that finished product from the still touches anything else, but in this case it's charcoal. Is that right?
That's correct. But bourbon gets put into a charcoal barrel, and so It's a different,
a charred barrel.
Yeah, but it's really charcoal on the inside. It really is. I mean, take a number 5 char, and it looks like it's been charcoal. But that is a good thing. That's what filters out some of the harshness. They say it was discovered by accident. There's 2 stories on the...
It was either Elijah Craig or Evan Williams. Which one was it?
They say Elijah Craig,
okay.
Who was also a minister, and he was also Scottish, and he was cheap. And he actually had a fire and some barrels burned, but he wanted to use them anyway. So he had
because he was cheap.
Because he was cheap, but it had a nice effect. The other story is that they used these barrels for hauling fish up and down, the Mississippi River down to New Orleans, and to get rid of the fish, they just burned out the insides of it to get rid of the fish smell. And
you know what? I worked for 10 years in a seafood restaurant. Mm-hmm. I feel like even fire won't get rid of fucking fish.
It's a smart, pungent smell for sure.
Holy
Very
moly.
strong. It's something.
So
those are the 2 stories.
I'm going to not like that story based on my experience with fish.
You like the minister story better.
That is horrific. You guys, I apologize that this is such a willy-nilly back and forth.
No
but
problem.
I'm so enamored by your story. So you guys do Enchanted Rock.
Did. In the old place, yeah.
I'm sorry. So you guys started Enchanted Rock, and then at what point do you send, I guess your sensei, your teacher, at what point do you send him packing? Are you already started Enchanted Rock? Is this before you started Enchanted Rock?
We had just about finalized the recipes and learned, I learned what I needed to know, and, you just don't keep having them there for months and months and months beyond what you need them for. So he moved on to his next assignment, and I had what I needed to know to do the project.
At what point did you guys decide to start something else? Let's say Rebecca Creek.
Right.
Because Rebecca Creek is under the same house or whatever as Enchanted Rock.
That's correct. That was the second product that we introduced. The second product was Rebecca Creek Single Malt, which was a grain to glass, malted barley American single malt whiskey. And then the third product was Rebecca Creek Spirit Whiskey. And the Rebecca Creek name came from a ranch that I owned with a partner out north of where the distillery was located. And it was kind of risky because it was the first whiskey with a woman's name in it, Rebecca.
You know what? I've never really thought about it, but that actually makes sense. That would be kind of risky. Mm-hmm. What inspired that name? Was it an actual creek?
It's an actual creek. A lot of story behind it, and we thought
just so y'all know, there's a golf course out there too.
There is.
So you guys are doing Rebecca Creek, and y'all settle on the name. Did y'all get the water from the creek, or is that just where the property was, and that's why you called it that?
The site at that time was over the Trinity Aquifer, and we were drawing water from that Trinity Aquifer, and Rebecca Creek was a tributary to that aquifer, so it fit the story. And again, any distiller will tell you to make good whiskey, you've got to have limestone filtered water.
Limestone filtered water makes the best whiskey.
Absolutely.
So that leads us into, finally, after 4 days, let's talk about Devils River Bourbon Whiskey. Tell me about the water and the name and how that all correlates.
Well, I went down to the Devils River back in college on a fishing trip. And
where is the Devils River?
The Devils River is southwest Texas, so it's south of Sonora, Texas. The headwaters begin in a little small town which doesn't even have a traffic light called Juneau, Texas, spelled different than Juneau, Alaska. Runs 94 miles down, spilling in ultimately into Lake Amistad, and which is in Del Rio, Texas. It goes below ground, above ground for all that way. The last 64 miles, give or take, are all above ground. And at the southern end of that river, there's a ranch where we draw water from a spring on that ranch. It's called Indian Springs. We take water from that ranch and we haul it up to Dallas, where we make Devils River whiskey. So we like to say that we give more than we take. So what I mean by that is we take a percentage of the sale of each bottle and give it back to the Devils River Conservancy. And that money goes for river protection, river cleanup, river management. And we have an annual donation arrangement with that organization. And we feel like it's important to preserve this beautiful place. And by doing that, they're able to take these funds and protect the river. When did you decide to spin off and create Devils River? Wanted to go into a different direction, and I've always loved bourbon. Wanted to just create a new product. We got all these different, types of whiskeys, the flavored whiskeys, the corn whiskeys, but I wanted to focus specifically on bourbon. I just love the fact that it's truly an American spirit. And
It's the only truly American spirit, right?
That's actually true, yes. Mhm.
Okay. So you decided to do this Devils River project because you like bourbon and you wanted to maybe do something a little bit different from, the already well-thriving Enchanted Rock and Rebecca Creek.
That's correct.
Okay. How did that process go? So it is a bourbon. It is made in Texas. You live in San Antonio. Devils River is produced just outside of Dallas in Frisco, Texas. How did that all happen? Why are you here and it's there?
Yeah, so Frisco is where our corporate offices are. We don't produce the product in Frisco. We produce it in Dallas.
Oh, thank you.
To make it even more confusing, we've got 3 locations, which is we get water from the Devils River, which is 7 hours away from Dallas. Let's just try to make this as complicated as we can. I live in San Antonio. The distillery is in Dallas, and then our corporate offices are in Frisco. Eventually, our goal is to combine all this into one little beautiful package, which will be in ultimately San Antonio, Texas. The reason I did this in the beginning was because everyone I hired for this project was from that Frisco, Dallas region. And I'm talking about the production manager to the sales manager to the head of marketing, which, by the way, he came from Cabo Wabo Tequila and Angel's Envy. So great experience we've got on our team. His name is Eric Hundelt.
Well done.
Yeah. And our sales,
well poached.
Yeah. And our sales manager, 34-year veteran in the industry, his name is Keith Neal, came from Republic National and was in the industry for a long time. So they were in that market, and they were okay with staying there. And I was okay with it at the time. And, they don't need to be at the distillery every day. They're sales guys and marketing guys. So one more interesting thing, and we talked about Prohibition earlier, but I think it's important to mention, even going further back, and you may know this, but what was the first tax put on U.S. citizens?
I have absolutely no idea.
It was on whiskey.
Son of a bitch.
Yeah. How could they take such a beautiful thing and put tax tied to it?
Shit, apply that to everything. My question is, what took them so long to start taxing all the cool shit we care about?
Right. So this was in the late 1700s, and most of the whiskey produced was up in the northeast part of the United States.
Oh, the late 1700s? So it didn't really take that long.
That's right.
Once they figured out, oh, you know what? You're right, because I've seen Hamilton twice, and there's a line in there about how do you think we're going to feel when you try to tax our whiskey? So that makes sense. It was as soon as we were in a country, we were like, hold on now. Where's all the money? It's in whiskey. I want a piece of that. Yeah. Which is the whole reason that you can't have a still at your house, because the government's not going to get their piece. That's
right.
why.
That's right. Why. So all this, the Europeans and other countries that came to the United States, early settlers, they were farmers for the most part, and they, grew corn. It was a very popular crop back then. But they had so much of this corn that it was rotting in their storage bins and in their barns. So they said, let's just distill it and we'll store it. And that became part of their barter system. So they would buy clothes with it, tools for their farm, and trade for food. And
they would trade distilled corn.
They would just
spirit.
Whiskey, basically whiskey.
They
corn
trade
whiskey for this is part of their barter system. And so we had this thing called the American Revolution, and we built a debt up of $10 million that the U.S. government owned, which sounds like such a nice deficit to have these days.
$10 million in 1770. Who cares? Holy shit!
And if we had the kind of fiscal responsibility we had back then, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Is there a number above trillion? That is a lot of money.
So back then, $10 million in debt the country was, and our first president, George Washington, said, we got to pay for this battle, this war somehow. So that's why he decided to tax. And this caused the Whiskey Rebellion, which was the farmers were up in arms about the fact that they were taxing their whiskey, which is what there was their currency back then. It was more valuable than gold, they said at some point in our country.
Wouldn't that be cool as shit if we were on the whiskey standard?
Right. So they were fighting. The tax revenuers were coming in trying to collect taxes, and then they were getting strapped to poles and tarred and feathered. And finally the president said, we got to stop this. So he hired a militia of 10,000 troops to come into that part of the country and stop this. And it was a battle. People died. People were brutally hurt.
Where did this take place? Do you know?
In the Pennsylvania region, mainly.
So not Texas, unlike all the other whiskey history and prohibition history?
That's right. So these farmers decided, screw this. We're getting out of this area. They're going to tax us. And they headed down to another part of the country, which ended up being Kentucky and Tennessee. It's not like that's some magical place.
It's just that it was on the river, right?
It's just that it had limestone filtered water. And they knew that that was important for making good whiskey. So that's where they settled. And it's really interesting, as a politician, George Washington, who gets all the credit for being the founding father of our country and all those things. George Washington was the first commercial whiskey distiller in the country.
Really?
And in Mount Vernon, he had a huge distillery where they produced lots of whiskey. It burned down many, many years ago, but they rebuilt it. So you can actually go tour Mount Vernon and see George Washington's distillery, and they do it just like they did back in the old days with flame-burning stills, and people are wearing the time period outfits, and it's a really cool experience. Again, I talked to you earlier about my collection of old stuff that I've got. I've actually got not an autograph. I've got the signature of a gentleman by the name of Alexander, and I can't think of his last name, Alexander J. something, but he was the Secretary of State who collected all the whiskey tax from the Whiskey Rebellion.
Wait.
I have that in my collection.
Secretary of State?
Secretary of Treasury.
Or State?
For the United States.
It wasn't Hamilton?
No, not at this time. I think he was after Hamilton. But when the Whiskey Rebellion was in place, this gentleman was collecting these whiskey taxes. So I just love just little pieces of history like that. So I happened to find his signature at an auction, and I have it in my collection. So it's a very old document from the 1700s.
So just to be clear, when Mike says collection, and we were talking earlier off mic, but what he's talking about is he has a collection of Prohibition era, and I guess before.
Pre-Prohibition, yeah.
Memorabilia. It is a very substantial collection, which some of it will be actually on display here where we are, which we haven't got to yet, but we will.
Well, anyway, that's the really origin of whiskey. The reason I love bourbon also is because it's not just, it's an American spirit, but what does America represent? America represents the melting pot of the world. All the European influence and culture that came here from other countries, England, Russia, and all these places where people came. So it's actually the end result of that. Just like, blues music or jazz music are truly American music forms. Zydeco. But I think that's why I like whiskey so much. Is it, bourbon specifically? Is it, it's just it's all those influences combined, the melting pot of this country, and this is what we came up with. I mean, there's been a lot of great things that have been invented by our country, and bourbon is one of them.
I 100% agree. If Devils River and Rebecca Creek did not exist, what's your favorite bourbon?
Again, I mentioned earlier I like barrel strength whiskeys, so I like a Booker's. I think it's a fantastic expression of a true barrel strength bourbon. A lot of people think it's too high in proof. It's like 129 because they age it in the top part of the rick house where it gets really hot, and it actually increases the alcohol content. So. It
is aged in a very specific section of the rick house, and that does not change. That shit is amazing. It is my wife's favorite bourbon. Mm-hmm. No offense. No. It is my wife's hands down favorite bourbon. Is that one. And
there's a lot of great craft whiskeys. I'm currently the president of the Texas Distilled Spirits Association.
Oh my God, I'm sitting with the president.
And a lot of our members make some wonderful things, wonderful whiskeys, and so, Balcones, Garrison Brothers, Witherspoons. I mean, there's some great products out there that are being made right here in the Lone Star State that I'd encourage, if you come to Texas and visit, to try, because we are quickly becoming a whiskey-centric state. We're the new Kentucky. The new Tennessee.
Do you think that has a lot to do with all the limestone?
I think that's part of it, but I also think it's part of the fact that we are such a large whiskey consumption state. We're not number one, but we're number 2 behind California.
California's number 1?
Number 1 in whiskey consumption. Yeah, and it's 35 plus million people or something. I mean, we're 27 million people, so if we had equal populations, I bet we'd drink more than California. We're also number 2 on tequila, which is surprising, behind California. I think with all the Hispanic culture we have in Texas that we'd be number 1 in tequila, but we're number 2. And I think it just simply has to do with population. Per capita, we're probably
I think that has to do with previously discussed George Clooney and Sammy Hagar. They're both California fools, so I think it's really their fault because they're they're tequila junkies. They just shoot it in their veins over there. But we drink it because we're not assholes.
That's right.
So,
hey, streetwalkers. Well, you're not literally streetwalkers. But now that I've got your attention, I am Stephen O'Reilly, and I have a podcast called the Bar Star Podcast. And since you're listening to the Fascination Street podcast, I think you should check out my show. It's just as interesting without all the famous people, because Steve has connections that I just do not have. But if you dig podcasts about music, working musicians, and other random shit that I decided to talk about, based around music, of course, because that's what I do. I'm a working musician for the past 30 years, then you need to check out the Bar Star Podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcast, on any platform, and make sure you check out barstarpodcast.com. Now back to the one and only Steve Owens and whatever the hell he was talking about.
tell me about the building that we're sitting in right now.
We are in a building that was built in 1919, which this happens to be the same year that Prohibition fell into law, when the Volstead Act was passed.
I really hope that is going to be part of the story of whoever's running the speakeasy and doing this tour.
It is.
I'm sure, because that is significant. This is amazing.
No, it's super cool because if you think about, how long ago Prohibition was, well, this building was brand new that year, and so you couldn't really buy alcohol legally all over San Antonio. You had to go to the speakeasies of this area. And going back to what we talked about, the red light districts, the blue zones, and the sports societies, those were real places in downtown San Antonio. So we're really excited to be in this building because of the fact that of the air of when it was built. And we want to recreate that. The theme of this, the motif in the main building is going to be Prohibition. I'm going to take some of my collection and put it on display. We're going to have a bar that was built back in the late 1800s.
This is the collection of Prohibition era relics and memorabilia.
Pre-Prohibition as well.
Okay, so
absolutely.
Some of your personal collection is going to be on display here.
Mm-hmm. One-of-a-kind items that I've never even seen before. And it'll be interesting to see the public's response to a lot of people don't realize the time gone by, many over a century.
It's been 100 years.
Yeah. And just kind of capture that speakeasy theme and the Blind Tiger and fun names they used to use back in the day of what speakeasies were. And we'll have that experience. In the 2013 Texas session, we were able to get past the ability to sell bottles out of the distillery and to sell cocktails, and we're going to be able to do that here. So we can sell 2 bottles per person per month. Up to 3,500 gallons a year.
2 bottles per person per month.
Yes.
Is this going to be a club-oriented segment of the population, or can tourists from the Ozarks come in and buy 2 bottles?
Anybody can come in here with an ID as long as you're 21 or older and not intoxicated.
But you're limited to how many you can sell per month?
2 bottles per person per month. And we have to keep a manifest of that. We have to take their driver's license, write it down, and it's a pain, but we have to do it that way.
It sounds like the regulations on marijuana around the country. They
Absolutely.
take your license, you're allotted a certain amount per day, per person. So it sounds a lot like that.
Very similar. Yeah, okay. Very similar. And that's 3,500 gallons a year is what we're able to sell out of the distillery in bottle form.
So does that mean that come
August?
Well, I was going to say May, but come May, you're going to be like, sorry, we are not allowed to sell anymore.
It's very possible, yeah. And that kind of sucks.
So you're the president of the
Texas Distilled Spirits Association.
You need to become the president of the America Distilled whatever and change that fucking law.
Well, that's a Texas law. That's a Texas law. So every law is states' rights in alcohol. So
you're the president of the Texas whatever?
We have filed
change them shits.
We're trying. We file bills every session. We've got the sunset session coming up in 2019. We filed 4 bills already, and that's one of them. It's going to ask for a more expanded version of that, and we're hoping that it passes. If you ask a consumer, should we be able to have the rights to do that, consumer would say, absolutely.
100%.
Yeah, if you ask a consumer, if I want to buy a bottle on Sunday, is that okay? They would say, oh yeah, I'd love to buy a bottle on Sunday, but we can't do those 2 things in Texas. So the liquor industry is controlled by a few people in the state of Texas, and it's a lot of money. They controls it.
Hold on.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, you're saying that money and politics are somehow related, we'll get right on out of town. So you guys picked Devils River. You're in Dallas. I feel like mainly you're in Dallas because a property opened up and that's where you put yourself. But we're coming to San Antonio because that's where you've lived for 20 years. You sold all your shit and moved here so that you could be a part of your kids' lives here in San Antonio. Why did you want to bring Devils River to San Antonio?
Well, I guess it's because I remember going there in college and discovering it for the first time, and it's a wild and beautiful place. It really is. The cell phones don't work, which is a wonderful thing. You're just
in San Antonio?
At the Devils River.
Oh, okay, at the Devils River. Gotcha.
I mean, you can't communicate with anybody. You're off the grid. So if you go down there, actually, I've got a float scheduled.
A float?
Down the river.
In a tube?
Like in a kayak. And
when is this?
This is going to be at the beginning of November. And we're bringing 8 wounded warriors to float this with us, and 4 of them have no legs. It's hard enough to float this river with legs. I can imagine. These guys are all Navy SEAL badasses, and they're going to float the river with us, and it's going to be pretty cool. We've got a photographer coming along, but to me, it's that bold.
Are you going to do it?
Yeah, I've done it before, but not with guys with no legs, so I'm trying to carry them a little bit, which is great. I mean, they carried us.
Does this? No shit. Well done, sir. Previous guest on this show is Purple Heart, Bronze Star. The most important one is Medal of Honor.
Was it Levi Rogers?
No, okay. It was actually Leroy Petrie.
Oh, yeah. He signed a Harley Davidson for us for a fundraiser, along with Levi Rogers, and it sold at auction for a military fundraiser that I'm involved with for $80,000. So it helped the charity. It's our annual event. It's called Whiskey and Wishes. It's here in San Antonio.
So we were talking about this building right here. This building was Burns in the 1919
was when it's finished.
It's called the Burns Building. It's in downtown San Antonio.
Which is a horrible name for a distillery, by the way.
Yes, it is. Talk about what this place is going to be and when it's going to be it. I want people to come here because this place is going to be, basically it's going to be the Evan Williams experience of San Antonio. So talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, so people love to learn, and the education side of it is going to be great because we're going to have the big glass windows. They're going to see the process. They're going to learn about how we make whiskey here. They're going to be able to try the different expressions that we have. They'll be able to hang out, and we'll have events here. We'll have live music. So it's going to be just a good, cool place to hang out. The tourism in San Antonio is incredible. A lot of people don't realize this, but the Alamo is the #1 tourist destination in the southern part of the United States, not just Texas, but the southern part of the United States. Over 3.5 million people come and see the Alamo every year, and it's a block and a half from here. So a block from the Riverwalk. The reason I chose this location was because of all the tourists. You go to businesses around this area and say, the people that come and frequent your establishment, where are they from? And they said, they're not from San Antonio, they're from somewhere else. 95+% of the people.
Everywhere else.
Different cities in Texas, different states, different countries. So this is a great way to get brand awareness on our product from tourism, and then they go back to their state and ask for our product, and that's the idea. So instead of just appealing to the locals, let's appeal to the world, and this is a great place to do it.
Well, having had a chance to sample your product for quite some time in quite some bottles, it doesn't need to be relegated to San Antonio or Texas or even the United States. This shit needs to be worldwide. I'm talking to you, France. France is the second largest downloader of my podcast.
Oh, they are?
They are.
All right.
So I'm talking to you, France. So on my podcast, I do a lot of telephone interviews because I interview a lot of people from all over the world, from Canada, from California, like just from everywhere that's not San Antonio. I interview a lot of people. So during those phone interviews, I typically drink a bourbon just to sort of calm me down and really get me into the space. I drink a lot of bourbon during my interviews. I'm not going to lie, it's not always Devils River, but it is legitimately probably 75% of the time Devils River.
That's awesome. I appreciate
that. Thank you so much
for
fucking up my interviews for the second half of the show, always. So it is an absolute pleasure and an honor to meet you.
You too. Thank you.
Are you the sole, because with Rebecca Creek, there's a couple of co-founders. Are you the sole founder of Devils River, or is there other people?
With Rebecca Creek, there was only 2 founders. It was me and my partner, and that was it. And then we had some investors.
Sure.
With this company, I founded the company with 2 partners, and then we've got investors as well.
Okay. Thank you so much for doing what you're doing. This is amazing. I love this product so much. You saw that it's basically featured in my 30 bourbon collection. I love this bourbon so much. I've gone through several bottles on air and off air. I've had to edit a lot because of you. So appreciate you. So we were talking about what you're doing to this building. So you're going to make this sort of a tourist destination, if you will?
Absolutely. We are at 401 East Houston Street, downtown San Antonio.
And also, there will be a speakeasy, a tasting room, a distillery, a
Rick House,
holy shit.
bottling facility.
Oh my gosh.
We're doing it all right here.
This sounds phenomenal. I can't wait. When is this projected to be open?
Next summer.
Summer of 2019.
That's right.
I sure hope I'm invited to opening weekend.
You'll be at the grand opening, ribbon cutting. You'll be here.
Holler, bitches. How many different expressions of Devils River are there currently?
We have the small batch Texas bourbon whiskey. We've got the rye whiskey, and we've got the barrel strength. And that's all we're going to do for right now.
And are all 3 of those available for purchase currently?
The rye whiskey and the barrel strength just got released last week, so you'll start to see those hit the shelf, and then here in the next couple of weeks, so we'll have them through the holidays. They are allocated, so we have limited production, but you can find them at most of the major retailers across Texas.
If you're not in Texas, reach out to me, and we can work something out where I will send it to you.
If you're in France, I can't help you, but we are. Currently, we're in 11 states in the United States.
If you're in France, I can help you.
Okay.
So reach out to me if you're looking for it. So I can buy it here because I live here, and I can ship it anywhere I want to because I don't have to have a liquor license. So everybody reach out to me, fashionistastreetpod@gmail.com. I will hook you up. Now, you have 3 different expressions. They're all available to me because I'm awesome. And Devils River Bourbon Whiskey, a small batch Texas bourbon whiskey, is actually available everywhere.
Everywhere across Texas, and then we're in 10 other states besides Texas right now.
Okay.
Mainly focusing on the southeast, but also Colorado, Oklahoma, Kansas, through the Midwest a little bit, and then Arkansas, Missouri, and then Florida. We just got into Kentucky last week, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Georgia.
Fantastic. That is a great start. But I think you need, obviously, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You need to push this worldwide. This product is fucking amazing.
Thank you very much. We're very excited. We've won 5 gold medals on the bourbon so far, 4 of them for taste and 1 for packaging. And then we just got the awards back from the San Diego International Spirits Competition, and we won a double gold medal on the rye. And the Asian Spirits Competition, we won a gold medal on the barrel proof. So we've had 7 gold medals in our short year and a half in business, and we're very excited about that.
And winning anything at the Asian competitions is important because they own more than half of the bourbon that's produced in America.
They do.
Is there a website for Devils River?
There is. www.devilsriverwhiskey.com, and you can hopefully like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram, and we're available across 11 states, and we'll try to get to you as soon as we can if we're not in your state.
Twitter as well?
Twitter as well, but not as active. Donald keeps that pretty busy.
Previous guest, the lovely and talented Bree Bagwell, is a spokesperson for Rebecca Creek Whiskey, soon to be, I would imagine, Devils River.
She's a wonderful girl and a very talented lady, and you look at the Texas music scene, and there's a lot of people in that music scene, and I promise you there's not a harder working person in the music business in Texas than Bree Bagwell. She tours her ass off, and she sings her heart out, and she's a great person, and I wish her the best always.
Previously on the Bree Bagwell episode, she talked about the man who waltzed up with a basket of bourbon and said something that she felt was a little bit creepy at the beginning, but turned out well. That was this gentleman right here. So absolutely refer back to that episode and check it out. She is the 6-time in a row Female Texas Vocalist of the Year.
That's
I'm
right.
sure I said all those words in the wrong order.
That's exactly right. Perfect.
But she's amazing. She loves this man right here for sure, which now I do too. What? Check out her episode. Also check out all of the previous parts of whatever this episode is going to end up being. I know you have a heart out after 4.5 hours of taking up your time. I really appreciate it, Mike Cameron. Are you personally on social media at all? Where can we find you, Mike Cameron?
LinkedIn and Facebook, but I don't ever.
Nobody
respond
cares
to
about LinkedIn. Please continue.
Okay. I'm not very active on either. I kind of just creep on everybody and look at what's going on, but I don't really post a lot of stuff. So social media reaches through Devils River. That's the best place to reach me.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us on Fascination Street and letting us get to know Mike Cameron, the brains behind the Devil. Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate all your time.
Enjoyed it. Thank you for your time and your interest in our project.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Hey guys, this is Steve Owens from Fascination Street Podcast here with a very important message. I'm awesome. I bet you thought I was going to say something else, but nope. What's important here is that I am awesome. I started this show because I truly believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear those stories. In the short time I've been doing this show, I've interviewed actors, directors, writers, inventors, podcasters, musicians, pro athletes, Olympic athletes, actual war heroes, even a Bond girl and a luthier, whatever the hell that is, and of course, regular people. From people who wanted to be stars but never gave it a real try, to big company CEOs and people who got to meet their favorite president. I love getting to meet and speak with people who have a story to tell. I feel like everyone does, and it's my job to get them to tell it. You never know who my next guest will be. An Academy Award-winning actor, a platinum-selling musician, or your own mother-in-law. But one thing is for certain, you will be fascinated by their story. So come take a walk with me down Fascination Street. You can find Fascination Street Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and of course, FascinationStreetPod.com. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.